The Empress stood at the center of the conference hall as screens glowed behind her. She was known in every boardroom and newsroom as a woman who never lost her empire stretched across industries and cities, touching lives she would never meet. Audience waited in silence. They were leaders, founders, strategists, and rivals. Each of them had come hoping to gain favor or insight or protection. The Empress looked at them slowly. She understood power as something felt before it was spoken. Her presence alone tightened shoulders and sharpened attention. For years, her organization had grown without challenge. Profits rose, systems expanded, and influence deepened. But beneath the success, something dangerous had been feeding. She spoke about instability without naming it, about patterns, repeating mistakes, compounding, and trust eroding. Those who understood felt a chill move through the printer room. The predator was not a person. It was the result of unchecked growth, ignored warnings, and fear of change. It lived in processes, culture, and quiet compromises. The Empress admitted this publicly for the first time. Gasps moved like a wave through the audience. To acknowledge weakness was rare and risky. She described the consequences with calm precision: loss of control, collapse of confidence, and eventual ruin. No one interrupted, no one breathed. Easily then, she issued the challenge, not to consultants, not to committees, but to anyone willing to step forward alone. Whoever could tame the predator would inherit control of the future, not a reward of money, but authority and responsibility over everything that followed. The challenge was not symbolic. Failure would be visible, and permanent success would change the structure of power. Many felt the weight of the offer and the danger beneath it. Eyes dropped, hands remained still. The Empress waited. She understood hesitation. She expected it. She had designed the moment to reveal something rare, not ambition but resolve, not confidence but endurance. The silence. She studied faces, searching for someone who saw the predator clearly, someone who did not look away. The hall felt smaller as seconds passed. What she sought was not bravery but understanding, and she knew when she saw it, the balance of everything would begin to shift. The predator moved quietly through the empire, long before anyone named it. It grew inside systems that once worked and habits that were never questioned. Every small shortcut fed it. Every delay made it strong. The surface numbers still looked impressive. Reports were polished, meetings confident, and projections optimistic. But underneath, friction spread, and people stopped telling the truth. Departments protected themselves instead of the whole. Decisions were made to avoid blame rather than solve problems. The predator learned to hide in those choices. It thrived on exhaustion. People worked harder, but felt less control. Turnover increased, knowledge vanished, and frustration settled in. Signals appeared everywhere: missed deadlines, duplicated work, silent conflicts, and sudden resignations. Each sign was noticed, then ignored. Fear played its part. No one wanted to be the first to speak. The predator understood fear better than any strategist. As it grew, it began to shape behavior. Managers avoided risk, innovation slowed, and trust eroded. The empire started reacting instead of leaping. The Empress saw the pattern long before others did. She watched data and listened to tone, not words. She felt the drag on momentum. Attempts were made to suppress the problem. New tools, new slogans, and surface-level changes. None of it touched the root. The predator adapted. It learned the language of reform and wore it like a disguise. This made it more dangerous. Those closest to the work felt trapped. They knew something was wrong but lacked authority. They waited for direction that never came. Time passed and pressure increased. External forces began to notice the weakness. Competitors circled quietly. The predator was no longer contained. It influenced every outcome and every choice, yet it remained unnamed. By the time the challenge was announced, the threat was real and urgent. The empire stood at a turning point. Either it would be confronted honestly, or it would consume everything it touched. The man listened from the back of the hall, where shadows softened attention. He had arrived early, taken notes, and expected nothing. He was used to being overlooked. His role inside the empire was practical and unselfish. He fixed problems after others failed and moved on without credit. Stability followed him quietly. He had seen the predator long before it was described. Not in reports but in faces and conversations. He recognized it in delays, confusion, and unspoken frustration. While others chased growth, he watched flow. While others defended titles, he protected outcomes. This had made him invisible but effective. As the Empress spoke, he felt no shock, only recognition. Her words matched patterns he had tracked. For years he did not feel ambition rise, he felt responsibility. The kind that settles heavy and refuses to be ignored. He knew the cost of stepping forward: public failure, isolation, and blame. He had seen it happen to others, yet he also knew the cost of silence, more loss, more damage, and eventual collapse. That burden felt worse. He thought of teams stretched thin, of capable people leaving quietly, of systems breaking because no one owned them. The challenge was not an invitation to power, it was an admission that something had gone wrong, that honesty mattered more than image around him. He sensed hesitation. People measured risk, and calculated outcomes. He didn't know, measured consequences. What would happen if no one accepted what would happen? If the predator continued unchecked when he stood, his movement felt louder than it was. Heads turned, curiosity mixing with doubt. The Empress noticed immediately. Their eyes met across the room. There was no approval there, only interest in that moment. The man accepted internally before he spoke. He understood the scale and the danger, and he chose to step forward anyway, not because he believed he would win, but because someone had to begin. The moment passed, and reality settled in. The man was no longer invisible. Attention followed him through the hall, and into the days that came next. He was given no special announcement, no applause, and no protection. The challenge moved from words into work immediately. Pressure arrived, without ceremony. He began by walking instead of commanding through offices, factory floors, and meeting rooms. He observed more than he spoke. People reacted cautiously at first. Some were curious, others defensive. Many expected him to fail quickly. He asked simple questions: why this process existed, who depended on it, what broke when it failed. That first answers were polished and safe. But he waited. Silence became his tool. Over time, honesty surfaced. Frustrations were shared, patterns revealed, and assumptions questioned. The predator began to show its outline. He documented everything, not for reports, but for clarity. Connections formed between problems. Once seen as isolated, resistance appeared quietly. Meetings were delayed, information slowed, and cooperation thinned. The predator tested him. He did not confront it directly. He kept moving, kept listening. Trust started in small places. A team given autonomy, a deadline adjusted realistically, a mistake addressed without punishment. People noticed, not because he promised change, but because he acted consistently. The work was slow, and often uncomfortable. There were no visible victories yet, only alignment beginning to form. The Empress watched from a distance. She offered no guidance and no interruption. This was part of the test. By the end of those early weeks, something subtle had shifted. Conversations lasted longer, problems were named, and the predator no longer felt entirely unseen. The predator responded once it sensed control slipping. It did not attack loudly. It tightened pressure quietly. Deadlines became traps. Unexpected failures surfaced at critical moments. Blame moved faster than solutions. The man felt the weight. Immediately messages arrived. Late nights grew longer, and patience wore thin. Doubt tried to take hold. He made mistakes. Some decisions slowed progress, others exposed weaknesses. Criticism followed quickly. Whispers spread that the challenge was too large, that one person could not hold it together. The predator fed on those doubts. Instead of retreating, he slowed further. He reviewed foundations rather than symptoms. He resisted the urge to perform when fear appeared. He acknowledged it. When anger surfaced, he stayed present. This confused those expecting resistance. He refused to assign blame. Problems were owned collectively or not at all. Accountability became shared. Some pushed back. Authority was questioned, and loyalty tested. The predator tried to divide. He met resistance with consistency. Rules applied evenly, promises kept, and boundaries held. Nothing dramatic, just steady pressure. People began to choose sides without being asked. Some walked away. Others stayed and leaned in. Fatigue was real. Progress was uneven, but direction remained clear. The predator had not been defeated, but it had been forced into the open, and once visible, it could no longer move unseen. The cubs circled the gate, their small claws scraping at the metal, their eyes flicking to the human, who stood still and calm, as if she understood everything without words. The air smelled of earth and rain, and something wild and untrained that made the hairs along her arms stand on end. She knelt slowly, her movements deliberate so they would not mistake her stillness for threat. Their noses twitched as they caught her scent, and their tiny bodies pressed closer to the shadows of the gate. The tallest cub tilted its head and let out a soft whine that vibrated through the air like a question waiting for an answer. She extended her hand slowly, palm open, the scent of her skin mingling with the warmth of the sun on her arm. The cubs hesitated a moment longer before curiosity overpowered caution, and the smallest one stepped forward, its tiny paws leaving prints in the soft dirt. The others followed like a tide, reluctant but drawn by something invisible and irresistible. She spoke in a voice that was low and soft like the wind through the trees, calling them by name or by sound she did not know yet, but it mattered not. They sniffed at her fingers, their whiskers brushing against her skin, and a shiver ran down her spine. That was not fear, but something older and wilder. She moved her hand just slightly, and the cubs leaned into it, their small bodies trembling with excitement and tension. The tallest one pressed its forehead against her shoulder, and she felt the quick pulse of its tiny heart and knew that they had decided they could trust her at least for a moment. The sunlight caught their fur, turning it to gold and copper and shadows that flickered across the ground, as if they were creatures of fire and smoke. She could feel the heat of them, the wildness of them, and yet a strange peace settled over her, as if the world outside had vanished and only this moment existed. The cubs began to nuzzle each other, their tails flicking nervously, as if to remind themselves they were still part of a pack. They did not speak, yet their presence spoke louder than words. She smiled, though her lips did not move, and the gate between them seemed less like a barrier and more like a threshold to something new, something dangerous and beautiful. She could not tell if she had saved them or if they had saved her, but neither seemed to matter. The wind shifted and carried the scent of the forest into her lungs, and she breathed in deep, knowing that once they crossed this invisible line, nothing would ever be the same again. The cubs lingered at the edge of the gate, their tiny bodies tense, but eyes bright with a mix of fear and curiosity. The humans stayed still, letting them decide the pace, letting the quiet stretch between them like a bridge made of breath and heartbeats. One by one they inched closer, the ground soft beneath their paws and the scent of the forest thick around them. The smallest one pawed at her sleeve, and she bent down, letting her hand hover above its back, its fur bristling slightly but not retreating. The tallest cub circled behind, sniffing the air, as if measuring the distance between danger and safety. She could feel its gaze on her, the weight of it pressing like gravity, pulling her into a rhythm she had never known but instinct recognized. She whispered sounds low and melodic, and they pressed closer like music weaving through the spaces between them. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain and moss and something untamed that made her stomach tighten in anticipation. The cubs began to explore her presence, brushing against her legs, rolling onto their sides, showing teeth in tiny mock threats, and she laughed, though no sound came from her lips. Their trust was fragile and new, but it shimmered in the way they moved, in synchrony, in the way their tails flicked and ears twitched. She extended both hands, letting them step between her fingers, letting them feel her weight and warmth. The tallest nudged her shoulder again, and she leaned slightly, letting him climb onto her arm, feeling the thrill of closeness and risk at once. The forest seemed to lean in around them, shadows stretching and receding, as if alive. The cubs yipped and whined, a chorus of sound that was half question, half declaration, and she answered with stillness, letting the world outside wait while they discovered each other. The gate no longer mattered. It was a line already crossed, a promise unspoken that whatever came next, they would face together. The sun dipped lower, sending streaks of gold across their fur, and she knew the wildness in them had become part of her own heartbeat, and she would never be the same again. The cubs stepped beyond the gate, their paws sinking into the soft earth with cautious excitement. The human followed slowly, letting them lead the way, letting the forest unfold around them like a secret revealed. They moved through shafts of sunlight and shadow, their bodies low and agile, sniffing every stone and leaf, as if memorizing the world. She kept her hands close to her chest, feeling the rhythm of their small hearts through the space between them. The tallest cub darted ahead and then paused to look back, its eyes bright and challenging, as if asking her to follow. She did, and the others bounded after him, tumbling over roots and moss, their playfulness a delicate balance with their wariness. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying scents of unseen creatures and the Thames of earth and rain. The cubs froze for a heartbeat, listening, and she froze with them, holding her breath as if the forest itself could hear her heartbeat. Their ears twitched, their tails flicked, and then they shook themselves as if shaking off the tension, and resumed their exploration. She crouched low, watching them, the way they moved together, a pack but also individually, curious and fearless in a way she could only admire. The sun slanted lower, turning leaves to fire and shadows to ink. The smallest cub found a hollow log and rolled inside, peeking out with wide eyes, and the others followed in a riot of fur and movement. They tumbled and pawed and nudged each other until the human reached out, letting her fingers brush against their backs, feeling the warmth of their bodies and the pulse of life that was raw and unfiltered. The tallest nudged her again, climbing onto her shoulder, and she let him perch there, feeling the thrill and danger mingling in her veins. The forest seemed to breathe around them, alive with possibility and threat, and she realized that this moment, this crossing beyond the gate, was not the end but the beginning, and whatever waited beyond the trees, they would face it together. The cubs moved deeper into the forest, their senses alert, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs setting them on edge. The human followed closely, her eyes scanning the shadows, the way their eyes did the wind, carrying the smell of something unfamiliar and sharp. Their paws sank into damp earth, and she could feel the tension in their bodies like a wire pulled tight. The tallest cub stopped abruptly, ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled from its chest. The others froze, and the human crouched down, letting them take the lead, letting their instincts guide the way. A shape moved between the trees, something larger, darker, and more silent than anything they had encountered before. The cubs crouched, their tails stiff and eyes wide, and she felt her own heartbeat quicken. With a mixture of fear and fascination, the unknown creature stepped closer, and they flinched, but did not scatter. She whispered soft sounds, trying to calm them, letting her presence anchor them in the chaos. The creature hesitated and then retreated, a shadow among shadows, leaving the forest heavy with its absence. The cubs exhaled in tiny whines and shakes, as if releasing tension they had not known they held. She reached out, letting her hands hover over their backs, feeling the heat of their bodies and the rapid drum of their hearts. The tallest cub pressed against her shoulder, and she leaned into him, letting him feel the steadiness of her weight. The smallest darted forward and returned with a leaf clutched between its teeth, a fragile offering, and she smiled. Though the sound stayed inside her chest, the forest seemed to settle around them, shadows loosening and light shifting through branches like a promise. The cubs sniffed the air again, tentative and curious, and she knew that whatever danger had passed was only the beginning of what lay ahead. They moved forward together, each step a test, each glance a reassurance that they were bound by something older than fear or caution, and she felt the wildness in them growing into a rhythm she could follow, a heartbeat in sync with her own, and she realized that trust once earned was a power stronger than any threat.